2022 Charleston County Planning Commission meeting. Please stand and join us for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Today's meeting was noticed in compliance with the South Carolina Freedom of Information Act. This commission acts in review and recommending capacity for comprehensive plan amendments, text amendments to the Charleston County Zoning and Land Development Regulations Ordinance, rezonings, and plan developments. The commission has decision-making authority on road name change requests, public project reviews, appeals of administrative decisions on final plats and subdivision matters, as well as other matters pursuant to Chapter 29, Title 6, Section 6-29-340 of the Code of Laws of South Carolina as amended. If you wish to speak at today's hearing, please fill out the sign-in sheet by the door. My name is Cindy Floyd. I'm chair of the commission. For those of you who cannot see the nameplates, to my right, Peter Pilotis, Marlena Davis, and to my left, Warwick Jones, David Kent, and Suzanne. What's your last name, Suzanne? Chavis. Thank you. Seated at the desk facing the dais, my right to my left, Commission Attorney Mark Bell, Joel Evans, Zoning and Planning Director Adam McConnell, and Logan Davis. Joel, would you like to introduce the staff that are present?
Sure. To my left, Andrew Millicent, the Deputy Director for the county. And to my right, on the end, are two new faces for you. This is Marche Miller. Do you want to raise it? There's Marche. And Savannah Murray. They'll be helping with the Planning Commission and taking minutes. You'll see them more and more, I think. So, yeah. And also Tamara Avery. Sorry, Tamara. Okay. Sitting in the audience. She'll be giving the presentation on subdivision. Okay. She's our subdivision planner. And Chris Wanamaker is here with Public Works. When we get to the resilience presentation, he'll be talking at that. And I don't see anybody else of mine.
All right. I would like to remind you that in order to get a good recording of the meeting for the minutes, please speak loudly and clearly into your microphones, and please do not talk over one another. The first item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes from the January 10th, 2022 meeting. Is there a motion and a second?
So moved.
Second.
Please call the roll.
Commissioner Chavis?
Aye.
Commissioner Logan Davis?
Aye.
Commissioner Marlena Davis?
Aye.
Commissioner Jones?
Aye.
Commissioner Kent?
Aye.
Commissioner McConnell?
Aye.
Commissioner Pilotis?
Abstain.
Ayes have it.
The next item on the agenda is a request to rezone TMS 390-00-00-076, 3347 Latson Road from Community Commercial Zoning District to the General Office Zoning Commission. Andrea Milicek, would you please present?
This property is owned by the Charleston County School District. It is 0.64 acres in size. It was originally zoned agricultural industrial, but it was rezoned in 1973 to the light industrial zoning district. And then with the 2001 ZLDR, light industrial went away, and most of those properties were put in the community commercial category, which is how this property got its zoning. This is the future land use map for the urban suburban area with the subject property shown at the northern portion of the county. The future land use map with the subject property shown here. It is recommended for commercial land use. That's what this red color is. This blue color is commercial, civic and institutional land use. And then urban, suburban, cultural, community protection is in brown. Current zoning is very different than the future land use recommendations in this area. This property is recommended commercial and is zoned commercial, but it's next to a lot of properties that are zoned general office, and some of those are actually recommended for commercial zoning. This is an aerial to the north. Latson Elementary is right here, a few parcels away, but the school district does own that property, the two properties next to it, and the subject property. This is a view looking to the south. They do want to rezone the property so that they can combine it with the others. There's some photos of the site, the structure that's on the property, and then the property next door, which is a home, and then looking across Latson Road. Differences in the allowed land uses between community commercial and general office. Community commercial allows all types of residential, including multifamily, up to 16 units per acre. It is our most intense commercial zoning district. General office allows 4 units to the acre with all types of housing units with the exception of multifamily. And it does allow some commercial uses, veterinary services, commercial guest houses, and then a lot of the office uses are allowed in this district. Staff feels that the approval criteria have been met, and therefore we recommend approval, and all notifications were done as required.
Appreciate the staff's comprehensive report. Are there any questions for staff from commission members? Is there anyone present who wishes to speak in support of this application? Is there anyone who wishes to speak in opposition? Okay. Is there a motion and a second from the commission
So moved.
to approve? Is there a second? Okay. Any discussion? Seems pretty straightforward. Okay, please call the roll. You get the vote.
Commissioner Shivers,
Aye.
Commissioner Logan Davis. Aye. Commissioner Marlena Davis,
Aye.
Commissioner Cindy Floyd,
Aye.
Commissioner Jones,
Aye.
Commissioner Kent,
Aye.
Commissioner McConnell,
Aye.
Commissioner Pilatos.
Aye.
The ayes have it.
County Council will hear this request at 2 public hearings on May 10th, 2022 at 6:30 p.m. in council chambers, and also at their May 19th, 2022 Planning and Public Works Committee meeting at 5 p.m. The request must then undergo 3 readings for approval at council's discretion. The next item on the agenda is a presentation regarding proposed amendments to the zoning and land development regulations to address resilience. Ms. Milchick will ask you to discuss this again for us, please.
All right. So as most of you remember, the resilient element of the comprehensive plan was adopted by County Council back in March of 2020. Many of you were on the committee that made the recommendations to Planning Commission for that, and you were on Planning Commission at the time as well. If you remember, one of the strategies was to appoint a Chief Resilience Officer for the county. That was done in October 2020, and Karen Green is our first Chief Resilience Officer. One of the other strategies of the element is to identify and pursue amendments to the existing county policies and regulations to improve the county's resilience towards long-term stresses and acute disasters. So that led to the creation of a new resilience committee, which was intended to look at changes that could be made not only to the zoning and land development regulations ordinance, but also to the stormwater regulations and the building and flood requirements for the county. So that committee started meeting in April of 2021. It's made up of community representatives and concerned citizens, representatives from the city of North Charleston, city of Charleston, town of Mount Pleasant, and town of James Island. And we have several county departmental representatives from budget, facilities, building services, zoning and planning, and public works and stormwater. It also includes representatives from the fields of property management, real estate, engineering, and home building, as well as representatives from the Nature Conservancy, Coastal Conservation League, and the Medical District. And then we had some representatives from the Planning Commission. They worked really hard. They learned a lot from other jurisdictions who have been working on this for a long time. And this all culminated in making recommendations to staff about the ways the zoning and land development regulations ordinance and our other codes, building and flood, and the stormwater manual could be revised to address resilience. So planning staff drafted amendments to the ZLDR to implement those recommendations, and we presented them to the committee for review and feedback. And now we want to bring them to you to get your feedback before we put them in a red line format and present them for a recommendation. So that's what we'll do today, is more for discussion and guidance purposes. So some of the items that the committee recommended we had actually already covered in the ZLDR. They're shown here. The first was an administrative strategy to have a staff person investigate and propose solutions to specific case-by-case issues. That's really what we do in site plan review, not only for resilience, but for all types of issues as sites are developed. The second was to stop development on wetlands and density and lot development requirements. And if you'll remember, the ZLDR amendments that you made recommendations for last year removed the ability to include freshwater wetlands in density calculations and lot area coverage requirements. The third item was to reduce parking requirements for developments in proximity to public transportation. That was another of the amendments that the Planning Commission recommended last year. We reduced the required parking for affordable and workforce dwelling units when they were near public transit. The fourth item was to strengthen our tree ordinance and require natural buffers. That's actually something we've done for years. We require the retention of natural buffers along all rights of way when you have a 20-foot or greater buffer requirement. And then the last item was to require parking area design to be separated into normal use, like everyday use areas, and high capacity overflows areas, and require use of pervious surfaces in the high capacity flow areas. And our ordinance already states you can have a 10% reduction in required parking if all pervious materials are used for the parking areas. There's a 40% impervious surface coverage limit, and no more than 70% of all developable land within parcels can be impervious unless otherwise approved by the planning director. So those were all sort of already covered in our ordinance. So now we'll move on to the items that the committee recommended that are not covered in our ordinance and would require amendments. The first committee recommendation is to encourage parking under buildings. This is to limit the amount of impervious surface that's required for parking in other areas on the property. So the recommended action in the Zoning and Land Development Regulations ordinance is to incentivize this by exempting the parking area that's under structures from the maximum building height calculation. So to do this, we'd have to revise sections 4.2.4 and 9.3.5 to exempt the area under buildings that's used for parking from the building height calculations. And we would allow this up to 1 story only, and only for multifamily dwellings and non-residential development, because those are the areas that need the most parking. We wouldn't apply it to single-family townhouse type developments. And then also we need to include a definition of story, which we proposed here. That would read, that portion of a building included between the surface of any floor and the surface of the next floor above, or if there be no floor above it, then the space between such and the ceiling next above it. Are there any questions about that? Okay.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
You noted that there would, it's not allowed, parking underneath is not allowed with single-family and
It is
condos.
allowed. It would be
is
allowed. We just wouldn't give you a higher building height calculation. So
Okay.
single family is limited to 35 feet in height.
Yeah. Mhm.
So you could still park under it, but you couldn't take your building beyond 35 feet in height.
Okay. Okay. I
So,
don't-
you get credit for 1 story of that, and how is that going to come into play as far as fire and with the reach of ladders and so forth?
You'd have to meet the fire code requirements.
Which is there a cap on the height of the building, or is?
Well, the fire department would work with the applicant to see if they have the equipment to reach the height. But I think more importantly, if it's multifamily or if it's a sizable commercial, it'd be sprinkled anyway. Right. Yeah.
All right.
It's a ridiculous question, but okay, we've just assumed in the way this is written that the whole of the lower ground floor will be devoted to parking, which will give the access to a greater height. But does it happen that only perhaps half of the ground floor is devoted to parking? And what happens then? Do you get half a story up, or do you? I don't know. Is it a ridiculous question?
I don't think it's ridiculous. It's a good question. And that's something we'd have to work out. Is
good.
it an incentive enough? Do we want to incentivize it to the point where even if you do a little bit of it underneath, that's something we'll have to think about. That's a good point.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll ask the question again next time.
Hopefully, we'll have answered it
Okay,
before you get
that's
to
what I
it.
mean, yes.
This is in reference to FEMA, whether they are, and the insurance companies. How is this going to affect the insurance and what is required by FEMA or building code?
I don't think it's going to affect it in a negative way. By raising the building up off the ground, by default, they will have more than met the requirement for the base flood elevation. So that should look positively for insurance companies, that you're higher than what the minimum would normally be required. We're just giving the applicant the opportunity to do that and not be penalized at the height of the building if they choose to go higher and put parking underneath.
Not too many people are choosing to go higher, but they are required to go higher
Well,
because of their flood zone.
right. So the idea of this is to capture that distance, that if you got to go a couple of feet up or a few feet or 4 feet up, that you could go ahead and go to the 8 or 10 feet height and not be penalized for that extra 4 feet that you're going and having the parking underneath. So do you see what I'm?
I
It's hard to
understand.
visualize, but yeah.
Yeah, somewhat, but let me make sure I'm hearing this right then. The extra feet it's not going to be included in what's required.
In the height, right.
Okay.
Yeah, it won't be included in the height, the
Okay.
extra feet.
Okay, and we haven't decided yet whether it's gonna be, if you just did like a partial parking, whether you'd get the full story.
Right, we'll probably maybe write it so that if the majority, more than 50%, so that someone would still benefit and get, we want to keep the incentive there, yeah.
With only partial parking and living area, isn't that essentially a residence with an attached garage? Say if you had I know these are multifamily, say you had a duplex with attached garages, is that not
Well, that wouldn't be multifamily.
like a duplex?
a duplex would
Or
not.
triplex or condos or?
No, it would be more like apartment buildings and that type of thing, yeah.
Yeah, do you have another question? Sorry.
Mr. McConnell?
The reason why we have these height restrictions, my understanding, is that they are for aesthetic reasons and keeping the character of these neighborhoods. Is that correct?
Right,
And so now we're allowing people to sort of have a automatic variance on that.
right. And it
I'm
would,
supportive of this, but I just want to say, are we going to get some pushback from certain neighborhoods,
Well-
historic preservation people regarding this going forward?
maybe, but keep in mind that we are only talking about commercial, industrial, office general, and multifamily apartments. So this would not apply to single-family residential or duplexes or townhouses or triplexes, right?
Would it apply on the Maybank Highway overlay, for instance, or would that overlay supersede these regulations?
It depends on how we want to insert these into the ordinance. Would have to look at each overlay, and then, a lot of times when we have these, we like to try to put them in all of our zoning districts where it makes sense. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, I thought the height restriction was also for fire.
That is, for the residential, yes, that's the sort of acceptable for single-family residential, that 35 feet height. But I think, and we did not have a height restriction in community commercial. No one ever chose to take advantage of it. For years, we never had a height restriction in there with that, and now we do. Yeah.
All right, now to the big one. The committee recommendation was to incentivize use of local, natural, and more sustainable landscaping and hardscaping by developers, less open lawns, more rain gardens, and more impervious surfaces. So the recommended action for the ZLDR is to add maximum impervious surface area requirements and define what impervious surface areas are. Right now, most of our zoning districts, with the exception of industrial, have a maximum building coverage. In our residential and agricultural districts, that's mostly 30% of the site. That's your building footprint. That isn't your sidewalk, that's not your, any kind of other hardscaped areas. It's really just the building footprints. If you have a shed, that counts towards it. If you have an accessory dwelling unit, that counts towards it. So what we're proposing is to change that, in most cases, to a maximum impervious surface coverage requirement that would include things like sidewalks and driveways and patios and those types of uses. So we've broken it down into 3 different categories by zoning district: the Parks, Recreation, Open Space Zoning District, Resource Management, all of our agricultural zoning districts, our rural residential zoning district, and then our low-density residential districts like Special Management, Manufactured Housing Subdivision, R4, and Manufactured Housing Park. The way it's being proposed here is that you'd have a maximum impervious surface coverage of 40% of the lot if the development is not residential. And if it is residential, that would only apply if your property was less than 30,000 square feet in size. If it's a residential development in those districts and the property is 30,000 square feet or greater, then you stick with the building coverage requirement you have today, which is 30%, because those are the larger lots, so it's not going to make as much of a difference. Then in our urban residential zoning district, this is where we allow our multifamily uses. Today, you have a maximum building coverage of 50%. What's being proposed is to change that to 50% or as allowed by the stormwater manual. And we have Chris Wanamaker from Stormwater that'll come and talk to you a little bit about this, but just as a brief explanation, there are instances where the stormwater manual requirements might be met and you might be able to get more than that 50% if you do things like underground storage. And that would be okay, up to 70%. But the stormwater manual may limit that below the 50% mark. So it's kind of one or the other. And then the same deal in the rest of our zoning districts: rural commercial, rural industrial, residential office, civic and institutional, general office, neighborhood commercial, community commercial, and industrial. We are proposing a maximum impervious coverage of 50% of the lot or as allowed by the stormwater manual. So with that, Chris, if you want to come up and explain it way better than I could.
Sure. That was really good. And that's the whole thing, is that basically our stormwater manuals locked down commercial very well over the last 12 or 13 years. And we just don't want to double dip on or make it, it'd be possibly controversial between ordinances, right? So any commercial site that's greater than half acre has to do stormwater calculations within, right now, the special protection areas, which is Johns Island, West Ashley, and James Island. And basically, they hire an engineer. When they go over half an acre of disturbance, they'll have to basically do calculations and show us that they don't cause any impacts up to the 25-year storm. Okay. So in anything less than a half acre, they're putting in a 50-gallon equivalent for every 500 square feet of impervious area. So even at a 25% impervious cover, if they add in 1,000 square feet, they're putting in 2 rain barrels of 50 gallons each, or 2 rain gardens, 50 gallons each, right? So it's actually, it could be less, it could be more stringent or less stringent. It just depends on how you look at it. So it's not necessarily just to be a flat 50% or more or less, right? We want to be smart about all development that's non-residential. So that's what we do. Residential is where to me, the big ticket's at here is if you have an existing subdivision that's already built out, it's full of 400 homes. It was built out in the 60s. They have no detention pond already, and everybody comes in and put pools and patios and decks and sheds and extends their driveways out, right? They get above. We're not keeping track of any of that. We have no regulation right now in stormwater manual to restrict any of that. So to us, we locked down commercial since 2007, and we've done a really good job at that. I'm sure everybody's heard, right? but all the kickback we get over every single little development. So,
But on major subdivisions, though, the stormwater looks at that carefully as well.
that's right. There's often confusion when we say residential upstairs, we mean individual homes permitted prior to 2007. Any subdivision, 5 lots or more, has a master plan put on it. It has calculations done, downstream analysis, everything, so.
And that's where, and working with this, that's where the authority belongs, is with stormwater. They have their own stormwater manual, and they can change theirs according to what the latest approved technology and accepted engineering for the stormwater. So we want to be sure that they keep that
Okay.
flexibility and they're not locked in
Okay.
to what a zoning ordinance says.
Okay, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
I have a question.
So, oh, I'm sorry.
Well, I was going to up one for Andrea, if I may. We say here, surface coverage of 40% non-residential and 30%. These are the existing limits, or are these the new limits?
The existing limit is a 30% building coverage. So what we're saying is if you have a property that's less than 30,000 square feet in size and it's residential, then you've got a 40% lot coverage.
So that's the change. It goes to 40% for that.
Goes to 40%, or if it's non-residential, then it goes to 40%. Yep.
And why 40%? I mean, I don't know. Do other people have 40%? Where did the figure come from?
It's a pretty standard one, and we also we didn't want to cap it at 30% because, building coverage is capped at 30%. So when you go lot coverage, that's more things to enter into the equation, so we wanted to give a little more flexibility for that.
Does soil type have any bearing on this?
No, sir, it will not.
I mean, because like my yard is sand, and it rains, you'll never see a water standing in my yard. But I don't know. It's good and bad news. It's hard to water your grass, but, or keep watering your grass. So should that not be considered on how well the lot,
Great question. I can tell you, the bottom line is I can put 10 engineers in a room and I can get 10 different answers about what the soil will run off in theory. And that's what we call a CN number, a runoff factor. And if you all remember, we used to base our entire stormwater fee on the runoff factor. And it's not easy to do. The most definable thing, it's indisputable, is impervious cover. Concrete, rooftop, or asphalt is what we do for our stormwater permitting. And it's kind of what I feel envisioned for this too. It's indisputable. Sure, will gravel, rock, compacted for 50 years, run off exactly the same as asphalt? Maybe 1% less, but is that 1% definable, defendable? Again, 10 engineers, right? So,
and I guess to follow up, did you answer the question as far as how these numbers just kind of round up, or is that kind of how you came up with the 40% versus 30% versus?
Sure, yeah. Well, yep, so for the kind of agricultural and residential districts, we didn't want to keep the 30% for a lot coverage requirement because that would really limit what they could do. So we gave them a 10% increase in that. The rest we left at 50% lot coverage, where they had 50% building coverage before in most cases for the urban residential districts. And then for our more intense districts, the commercial districts, we allowed up to 50% on those as well. Thinking that you could then figure out a design that would work, or use some of these other incentives, the parking under the buildings, to meet those requirements.
Last question.
Okay, go ahead.
All right. So the one thing I worry about are these lots are getting smaller, and they're doing detached garages, and now they want to put a pool in the backyard, and probably not going to be able to put a pool in the backyard with these new calculations. Is that fair to say?
Well, you can ask for a variance, and that's what we'll talk about next, but you have to show how you're going to mitigate that extra impervious surface if you're tripping your impervious surface percentage.
Yeah.
So,
Oof.
Suzanne?
Thank you. I remember you making a report a while back in reference to a project that you all were working on east of the Cooper. Do you remember that? No, I was talking to I'm sorry, I forgot your name.
Chris,
East of the
I,
Cooper?
I said, I remember a while back, like last year sometime, you made a report about a project that you all were working on east of the Cooper. Do you recall that?
We got about 20 so projects in the East Cooper.
Okay, all right.
And just with you, I don't recall.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't remember the name of it or the exact area of it, but I just wanted to know whether, in accordance with the growth and development of Charleston County, whether stormwater is up to date and, or catching up, or whatever you label it as.
Yes, ma'am. I think that we hold the strongest stormwater program in the state of South Carolina, and we have since 2007.
Okay. And I heard Andrew said y'all have or either Joel mentioned that your manual allows you certain freedoms to move up and down the scale. So this fits right into your plan, what's being recommended here? Or what's being,
So the moving up or down or around, regardless of impervious area, there will be stormwater calculations put behind it. Is the ability to move possibly without a variance request, I guess is what it would be. That if they're already meeting the stormwater requirements, they will be doing above just picking, they'll be making sure they don't cause impacts and not just staying under an impervious area. And this is for commercial only that we're talking about here, commercial, multifamily. We're making sure there's no impacts to our receiving systems downstream. We don't want them to cause any more impacts to our system any more than they can. So we do better than just saying don't go over the impervious area. We say actually show us every drop of water that hit the site prior to doesn't also run off faster than after development. And if it does, what are you going to do about it to slow it back down? So we keep our hand on their throttle to make sure they don't allow more stormwater to run off site than what it did prior to development.
not to run off site onto somebody else's property or
Yes,
head
ma'am.
on out.
Exactly, yeah.
What authority do you have if it does run onto somebody else's property?
So what we talk about there is volume. And right now, we just implemented March of 2021 a volume control on the special protection areas, which is Johns Island, James Island, West Ashley, unincorporated areas only. And that's a big deal. So we do a 2 and 10 year volume control measure. And I tell you, gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, that's where it's at. And that's what the rest of the country's quickly moving to too.
Like, when you mentioned Johns Island, there's so much, how would you say, the city of Charleston is here and unincorporated areas there. And so do you two have a good working rapport to keep the water flowing? Are you in sync with what the city of Charleston is doing for stormwater as well?
Yes, ma'am. We sure are.
Okay.
There's a couple of people are starting to jump up a little bit. Dorchester County just went to a 50-year design storm. We all watched the 100-year. Sure, we get 500 years. I know everybody calls it 1,000-year, but it was really the 500-year. But we have a very strong pulse on commercial and residential. That's what I want to make sure we don't forget here, that the first part of this is residential neighborhoods that have been in development, been there since 1920s. You notice, I don't know if y'all have seen that presentation from Wes or Eric, that the biggest impacts come from the slow migration of the residential properties, right? The build out, the slow incremental effect of the residential properties as they put in their pools and patios and sheds and decks. They also, their entire development didn't even start with a detention pond or retention pond, right? All the developments that's going in today holds their water back. They manage their water. We make them do that. So it's a big number. I think there's about 39,000 parcels that are residential in unincorporated areas. So it can be big, but it's also something that's not done. It just continues to get worse and worse without regulation. So.
Okay.
Anybody else have any questions on this section?
All right. So along those same lines, some other amendments are to prohibit driveways of any surface type from being located in the OCRM critical line buffer. In our overlay zoning districts, we're going to have to amend those requirements to correspond with the changes that we're making from building coverage to impervious surface coverage that we just talked about here. And each overlay district is different, so we'll have to work those in to make sure that they make sense in those districts. And then, like Mr. Kent had asked, what happens if you go over that percentage? We have to allow a method for a variance request. But instead of just being able to ask for a variance and going to the board without any sort of mitigation attached to it, we're proposing to require that all applications for variances, when you're going to exceed that maximum impervious surface coverage, include documentation showing how they're going to mitigate it, and show documentation that they have gotten that reviewed by the Public Works Department to make sure that it is a feasible method. Mitigation types could include green infrastructure and low-impact design techniques, but in no case shall the maximum impervious surface coverage go beyond 70% of the lot. That is something we have in our current ordinance, and we'd like to stick to that. Along those same lines, again, in order to implement those things, we'll have to amend our zoning permit section to require that applicants for zoning permits show the impervious surface coverage on their site plans. Right now, they just show us building coverage calculations. We'd have to amend our variance section to discuss that mitigation requirement for variance applications from impervious surface coverage requirements. We'd have to amend Chapter 9, our development standards. We want to allow increases in impervious surface for parcels involved in shared access agreements to incentivize those as well. Define impervious surface coverage, as you see here, and pervious surface coverage, also shown here, and that works with the definitions in the stormwater manual as well. And then we also plan to clarify the differences between terms like paving and impervious surface that we currently use throughout the ZLDR to make clear what we mean by those terms now that we're talking about impervious surface coverage. Any questions on those?
I'm not clear about the Chapter 9. So allow increases in impervious surfaces for parcels involved in shared access agreements. So if it's a shared access, even though you're allowing a greater amount of impervious, the overall effect would be less impervious?
That's actually purely just to incentivize shared access. Yeah.
Allow increases in building coverage for it,
Okay.
from like 30% to 40% if you do it.
Okay.
So this would just say that if you have an impervious surface coverage requirement, you might be able to get more if you do a shared access.
Along, what would the scale of that be?
That's what we have to figure out. We wanted to figure out make sure you all were okay with our percentages now. Right now, it's a 10% increase for building coverage, so I wouldn't think it would go beyond a 10% increase for impervious surface coverage.
Anybody?
So the recommendation is to incentivize the use of local, natural, and sustainable landscaping and hardscapes, right? What are the actual incentives? These sound like mandates, not incentives. So are there actual other incentives that are proposed or not?
Not in these. This is our first cut at these. We intend to have more amendments in the future. There are sort of longer term amendments that were recommended by the committee, but they do need some more fleshing out over time. And one thing that you'll see when we get to the comprehensive plan review is looking at things like where development should occur, kind of the way the city of Charleston did with the Dutch dialogues, but starting with the comprehensive plan, getting it in there, and then building on it into the zoning ordinance. And I think a lot of what you're talking about could probably be incorporated that way.
Thank you.
All right. So one thing that the county may see is a request to increase the freeboard to 4 feet. So the freeboard is the distance between your base flood elevation and your lowest first floor member at the bottom of the first floor member. Right now, that has to be 2 feet per the building code for the county. One thing that came out of the committee's recommendation is to increase that to 4 feet. That's something that would be taken to council from building services because that would be a change to the building code. But in looking at that, one thing that we thought about in our zoning ordinance is our definition of building height. Right now, the way our building height is defined, it's measured from the base flood elevation up. It's typically 35 feet, 50 feet, whatever it is. So if you have, even if you have a 2-foot freeboard, you're technically losing 2 feet. If it goes to 4 feet, now you're losing 4 feet from that height. So the recommendation is to change the definition of building height to be measured to that design flood elevation where that freeboard is, so you're not penalized by that freeboard area requirement. Does that make sense?
Where is 4 feet coming from?
That was a recommendation from the Resilience Committee.
But why?
Well,
I mean, we're already 2 feet above what FEMA says we need to be.
right.
And now you go 4?
Yeah,
That's a hardship.
yeah. That's something that the building department will be proposing. It does increase significantly the county's rating for flood insurance. Whenever you have, that's where even the 2 feet came from to begin with. They have, the FEMA flood rating system has milestones and numbers attached to them of bonuses that jurisdiction gets. Things like, certain feet above flood elevation, amount of open space in an area. There's a sort of a basket of things that jurisdictions can do to improve their rating.
Well, I know, I understand that, but
Right.
4 feet,
Yeah,
that's, I mean,
yeah.
some tall houses.
Yeah, and that, that would be sent, through the building department to county council direct. They don't have that's not a planning commission thing, so we wouldn't necessarily see that, but I do know that the building department is looking at introducing that. And where it winds up, I don't know. It may wind up at 3 feet when they go through their process.
Is there any other municipality in South Carolina that does that?
No, the
Folly
answer to
Beach.
that. Folly Beach has 4? Okay.
I think they're the only one that I know of.
Yeah, I can
Yeah.
understand a barrier island, but
Mhm.
wow.
Well, this ZLDR amendment is not necessarily tied to that. Either way, it's still, even with our 2-foot freeboard, it would allow you to be measured from 2 feet above
Right.
up as opposed to 2 feet below.
So today, as we speak, everyone is losing 2 feet, if you're in a flood zone, 2 feet off of their potential height because we have the 2 feet addition. That's the design elevation, not the base flood.
And
Because
to
we,
get a
because
4
we
feet-
measure from the base flood and
Get a
zone.
4 feet, then we can, or even with just keeping the 2 feet, we'll still be able to go 2 feet higher than we do now.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Right.
Does that make,
What's that?
does that make a big difference? I mean,
I can tell you
Yes, it does. It does.
every foot makes a difference to some of these houses that are being designed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another unintended consequence of that is these lots, as they're developed, if they could be brought up an additional 2 feet, this is for all properties, right, residential and whatnot. You might end up probably, if you know most of the developers around here, with some really funky lots where you have basically houses propped up on islands, right? And then you're gonna have runoff issues on the rest of the property. There will be an inconsistency in the land geomorphology going forward. You're gonna be modifying that more significantly than you would otherwise. So the natural systems may actually start working less effectively than they already are as you continue to modify, like big tract developments and stuff like that.
Right.
It's a problem, something to look at.
And that's another, Andrew was talking about the more longer term things. We will be, because we know the city is going to be looking at it, is the allowable amount of fill on a property in general. And that'll be another set of ordinances that the planning commission will see.
And so if you couldn't get to your 4 feet as required by this proposal, and you couldn't fill the lot, you're gonna basically make lots undevelopable or go to an alternate construction method, like on piers, pilings? Would that be the solution there?
Yeah,
Or raised slabs have been very popular lately, so.
right,
But to your point, I think that might look a little funky if you have
right.
2 more feet of a raised slab. They already kind of look off. sometimes, so.
Suzanne?
I just want to know, how is this going to impact the historic houses and restoration of historic houses and rebuilds?
So if it's truly on the National Register of Historic Places, there are exemptions built into the building code requirement for those. And I don't know what those are. I can tell you, the next meeting, we can have someone from the building department that's a little bit more knowledgeable on these things, that with these building questions, that we can get them to try to answer for you. But my understanding is that if it's on the National Register, there are exemptions that are available to them.
Okay. And just what about some of the older houses, if they decide to do some type of renovation or restructuring of their homes, will they have to go up?
So they have the 50% rule that's been in place. I don't think that's changing anytime soon. If your renovation or remodeling is equal to or greater than 50% of the value of that structure as a whole needs to meet the current building code requirements. So, and that happens today.
Yeah.
Without any new ordinances. People either raise the house or they demo the house and build a new one, if it's something that can't be fixed, right?
So the city of North Charleston looked into doing that at some areas where there are some nuisance flooding that occurs. We looked at raising homes. To raise a 1,200 square foot brick ranch from ground level up 2 feet is about $60,000. So that's the hardship that you'd be imposing upon existing residents in this case.
Right. Yeah. Dealing with the inevitable or onset of these recurring storms and sea level rise is not something that's cheap.
Right. And you can be penny wise and pound foolish too, you know, so that's $60,000, but how much is the entire house worth if it's damaged, irreplaceable, you know, you got to start over with the flood, so
So I get
that's your choice, unfortunately.
That's why it's good to get it done right the first time.
That's going to be an interesting meeting.
The building department will be here next week.
Okay, anything else?
That was it. So we will bring the proposed amendments in red line format back to you for the May 9th commission meeting for recommendation, discussion at that point. And we did people, so.
Thank you for all this information that we get to go home and digest. Okay, the next item on the agenda is the director's remarks, including presentations on the 2023 Comprehensive Plan 5-year review and an update on the subdivision process, which will be delegated to staff members by Joel.
Tamara Avery, our, sorry, you're going to do the compliment. Subdivisions.
Your chauffeur.
Sorry about that. I was
You can say it's
jumping ahead.
chauffeur over here. All right, so many of you know what a comprehensive plan is, but I know we've got a few members who are new and haven't been through this process before, so I can assure you it's fun.
Oh, yeah.
So you'll enjoy it. It's an expression of a community's vision for its future. It is law. It is adopted as an ordinance. It serves as a guide for public policy decisions, not only for the zoning decisions that you all make, but across the board. You know, the green belt, transportation, affordable housing, all types of things are included in this. So it's meant to be a guide for all of the decisions that the county makes. The authority is granted to us by Article 3 of the Code of Laws of the state. That describes the process, the elements, and the requirements for comprehensive plans. So we have to abide by that and make sure we're consistent with it. It does require that we review the plan at least once every 5 years and update it at least once every 10 years. So our last 10-year update was in October of 2018, so this is going to be a 5-year review. The initial plan was adopted in April of 1999, so that's where this all began. And we've done several reviews and updates over the years, and then you can do amendments to it in between as you see fit. So it requires at least 10 elements. You have to adopt at least the land use element in order to have zoning. You have to have at least the community facilities, housing, and priority investment elements. If you want to have land development regulations, we have all of those. And state law changed not too long ago to require a resilience element, and we also have that element in our plan. And each element has to have three things: an inventory of existing conditions, a statement of needs and goals, and implementation strategies with timeframes attached. So if you look at our comprehensive plan, that's exactly how each element is set up. You've got an inventory of the conditions, the statement of needs and goals, and then it ends with the strategies and timeframes. Just a quick refresher on all of the elements. There's a population element, which are really just the demographics of the area. Economic element, that includes labor force demographics, employment by place of work and residence, and so forth. The natural resource element includes coastal resources, wetlands and waterways, agricultural and forestal lands, plant and animal habitats, parks and recreation, things like that. Cultural resources, this is where our historic surveys come in, historic buildings and structures, archaeological sites. Community facilities element, that includes our water, wastewater, solid waste, recycling, EMS, law enforcement, schools, and government facilities. The housing element includes an accounting of the location, type, age, condition, owner, renter occupancy, as well as the affordability of housing. Transportation includes not only road improvement projects and new construction projects, but also transit, pedestrian and bicycle, railways, airports, things like that. The land use element is the one that you're most familiar with. You hear us talk about that all the time. It's our existing and future land uses. There's a priority investment element that analyzes federal, state, and local funds that are available for public infrastructure over the subsequent 10 years, and it makes recommendations for the projects for those expenditures. And it also includes recommendation on expenditures be coordinated with adjacent jurisdictions and agencies. We, as a county, have an energy element. That's one that is not required, but that promotes conservation and renewable energy. We adopted that in 2010. And we have a resilience element. That is our most recent element we talked about a little while ago that prioritizes resilience in all of our plans and policies. So again, our 5-year review is due in October of 2023. We have 3 main objectives. The first is to review and update the vision statement, the background information, goals, needs, and strategies for each element. And in order to do that, we are meeting with all of the county departments and other agencies to update all of that information, and we'll bring that back to you in red line format in the future. We are also going to incorporate sustainability into the energy element, especially now that the county has a sustainability officer. So we're working with her for that. And to review and update the annual work program. And as you'll see, we've actually accomplished a lot of the items on the work program from the last update of the plan. So our draft schedule. So since January, we have been working with other staff members to identify the revisions that need to happen to update the plan. We plan to finalize the initial draft between June and December of this year and present it to you for feedback, and then get it ready to go out to the public next winter. We plan on holding public workshops, and the way we do that, we have 5 geographic areas where we take this out to: Edisto, East Cooper, North area, and then West Ashley and James Johns Island areas, so that it's easier for folks to get to us. And we will also have a presentation that's online with the ability to provide feedback online for folks that are unable or would prefer not to attend a public meeting. So we'll get all that feedback together and incorporate it into the draft and bring that back to you between April and May of next year, so we can get a recommendation and move on to the council adoption process, hopefully starting in July of 2023, to give us time to have it adopted in October.
All of this is going to be done in-house. We don't have to hire anybody.
We're
Yep.
not planning on it right now.
Great, yep.
We have a good base of our comp plan when it was done, when we did have the consultant 12 years ago.
Yeah, 2008,
Yeah.
14 years, yeah.
14 years,
Mhm.
wow. Yeah.
Yep.
And are we anybody have any questions on the process for Andrea? I think Tamara's supposed to tell us about subdivisions now.
Now Tamara is.
Tamara.
Busy.
You had to go. We took two.
Stuff out of your way.
Very busy. That's why I wanted her to get up here to
Yep.
show you what she does.
So I'm Tamara Avery. I'm the subdivision planner. I've been here 6 years as of last week. So we're just gonna give a little update of what we've been doing the past few years. So who do we review for? We review for the unincorporated Charleston County, Town of Ravenel, Town of James Island, if it's over 4 lots and considered a major subdivision, and the Town of Rockville. What type of plats do we have in subdivision? They're categorized as exempt plats, minor subdivision, major subdivision, and major subdivision consists of preliminary, conditional. I have an asterisk by conditional because we took that out with the new ordinance revision, but the Kiowa River Development Agreement still allows for it. So they're the only developer that can still do conditional. And then final subdivisions. Exempt plats are kind of your basic plats where you're not creating lots. So it's boundary surveys, property line adjustments, easement establishments, or if it was existing lots where you've abandoned the property line and you want to reestablish the lots, those are considered exempt plats. Minor subdivisions are now 4 lots or less. Before the ordinance amendment, it was 10 lots or less. And now that's been reduced to 4. You can access minor subdivisions off of the ingress-egress easement, and minor subdivisions go straight to final plat, so there's not the preliminary plat process. We require, proof of water, sewer, DOT, coordination letter, and all the documents like ownership affidavit, restrictive covenants affidavit, but you don't have to actually install any infrastructure like you do with a major subdivision. And major subdivisions are now considered 5 lots or more. With the ordinance amendment, it changed. We used to just require a right-of-way, but now you have to meet the secondary county road standards for any major subdivision, and that's a 50-foot right-of-way with a 22-foot travel way, and it has to be at least rock for your foundation. It doesn't have to be asphalt. And major subdivisions start as preliminary plats, and then they transfer to final plat once all the infrastructure is in place. So what is the process for a major subdivision? So I would say the past 4 years, we've tried to work with stormwater to run parallel with our approvals. So the way it currently works is a developer would have a pre-application meeting. They would submit a preliminary plat. We would review it, make sure that it met the ordinance guidelines. And then after first review, we ask them to submit to stormwater, so that stormwater and preliminary plat will run parallel. We review it for the grand trees. We ask for clearing and grading plans to look at construction drawings. And we get it kind of to a final approval for preliminary plat and stormwater approval. And then kind of running concurrently with that, they're working with the other jurisdictional agencies like DHEC to get permit to construct for water, sewer, SCDOT encroachment permits, stuff like that. So by the time we have our preliminary plat reviewed with stormwater conditional approval, they would provide us with permits from all the other jurisdictional agencies. We review the construction drawings that are approved by stormwater to make sure that no amendments to the original construction plans have been revised, again, to double check for grand trees and encroachments. And then once construction drawings are approved, you have stormwater approval with the permits. Then we have our staff go out and do a tree barricade inspection, and then we will release the zoning permit to start the clearing and grading. Preliminary plats are good for 2 years. After 2 years, you can ask for a 1-year extension, and then after that, you need to have your final plat submitted with your DHEC permit to operate submitted to our office. And then Also, preliminary plat, you do not, that's not recorded, obviously. So final plat would give you your TMS numbers so that you can sell the lots. So what have we been doing? In 2018, we had 295 submittals. It dropped in 2019, 2020 to 234 submittals. And last year, we had 312 submittals.
Is that all three? The exempt
Yes,
major?
yes, combined. So in looking at that, those are initial submittals. So last year we had 312 initial submittals. We normally review those 2 or 3 times. So we're at about like 1,000 reviews. The types of submittals have changed over the years. The blue is exempt plats, kind of where no lots are being created, and then your minor and major. And you can see last year, the minor subdivisions, which at the time were 10 lots or less, really jumped. And we had, I think, 21 major subdivisions submitted last year. What's currently in the review process? So these are all the major subdivisions we're currently reviewing and the number of lots that they're proposing. So you could see we have quite a few, and it would bring an additional 878 lots created in Charleston County. And those haven't been permitted for construction yet. Those are just in the preliminary plat process and going through stormwater review and getting permits. These are the major subdivisions that are under construction and that they have received preliminary plat approval, and it's about 424 lots. You can see Woodland Shores is 5 lots. That really fell under the old ordinance, but we did a preliminary plat just because with the grand trees and the lot orientation, we were concerned about the stormwater requirements. So we asked the developer to do a preliminary plat until they were pretty solid with their stormwater requirements. And then where are we at for first quarter 2022? We've had 84 plat submittals in the first quarter. So that kind of puts us on a path to get at least 336 new submittals this year. That was the first quarter, 33 exempt, 44 minor, and 7 major subdivisions. And we've held 18 pre-application meetings. That's all I have.
So are things continuing to increase, or do they look like they're kind of leveling off?
They're increasing. Yeah.
It seems like we have a little bit of an increase in minor subdivisions, even though we reduced the number of lots. Are those requests mostly just to split existing lots into like 2 parcels, or like what's driving that?
So what we're seeing for minor subdivision, if they're on the cusp of being 5 lots and considered a major subdivision, they don't want to go through that process. They'll drop it down to 4. And we have noticed, everybody, if they have a little bit of land, they want to subdivide it. They want to subdivide it to sell the lot, to pay off their mortgage. They want to subdivide it to give it to family. So we are seeing a lot of the smaller parcels just trying to be subdivided if they can.
Anybody? No other questions, comments?
We're gonna,
Thank you.
I was talking to Tamara, at least once a year, we'll have Tamara come and do this. I think it's valuable for the planning commission to know, the trends and where we're going with our subdivisions, and because that informs you of like any ordinance amendments as well. Right.
There, no further business. Anybody got any other business? This meeting of the Charleston County Planning Commission stands adjourned. We will hold our next regularly scheduled meeting on Monday, May the 9th, 2022 at 2 p.m. here in council chambers.
Okay.
Good catch today. You earned your water bottle today.
Thanks, bud.